Hello, Gaston County. Welcome to episode number 117 of Gaston's Great. That's correct. I'm shocked that we have made it to 117. And as a reminder, this is a podcast highlighting some of the great things happening in and around Gaston County. I'm your host, Stephen Long, and we're coming to you once again from the international headquarters of GSM Services right here in downtown Gastonia. We have another great episode today, and one that I have been looking forward to for a very long time. I am thrilled and honored to have Barbara Voorhees on the podcast today, and looking forward to hearing all she has done by serving others. So, Barbara, it's great to have you on, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
So before I ask the first question, I'm going to just say something. Barbara, I've been fortunate to know who I used to call Mrs. Voorhees forever. That was the one thing that was difficult about Rotary.
Yes.
When I first joined Rotary, believe it or not, it's been 22, almost 23 years now.
Wow.
The whole thing about calling people by their first name in Rotary, I was like, ooh, I don't know if I can do that. I mean, if you think about 22 years ago, the people that I joined when, and you were one of them, but I have gotten over that and call you Barbara now, which is just odd to me. But, Barbara is, she might not even know this. I don't know if I've ever told her directly, but is a mentor of mine, somebody that I just look up to and consider. And I'll get into, maybe if we have time, I'll get into a little more of that before we finish. And there's a couple specific things that I'd like to talk about related to that. But also know Barbara has so much to share, and she's such a unique individual and interesting individual and has done so much for our community. So we're going to get right to it after that personal indulgence. So Barbara, just tell us a little bit about yourself, anything you'd like to share, and then we'll get into kind of your career as well and what you've done here for our community.
Okay. Well, I've got to give you a little background because that helps explain what happened when I got to Gaston County.
Sure.
So grew up in a small town in upstate New York. Don't hold it against me. And lived in New Jersey for a while. But anyway, in a small town, and if you're living in a small town, there's not a lot to do. So my parents made sure that we read. We learned how to do things like iron and mow the grass and peel shrimp. You had to leave the tail on. If you don't, that doesn't count if you don't leave the tail on. But wallpapering, painting, they were equal opportunity parents. Yeah. You just did what needed to be done, and that's the way I grew up. And we heard no a lot. My dad was a Presbyterian minister. My parents grew up in the Depression, were young adults during the Depression. And if you wanted to go to Howard Johnson's for ice cream, no, we have ice cream at home. If you want a new expensive dress, no, you can get that one. And we heard no a lot, but when you needed glasses or braces or music lessons, yes. And sending 3 kids to college, yes, no debt. Think about that.
Yeah.
And so I had an older sister and a younger sister. In a small town, you play co-ed sports, so I learned how to bat a ball, looking at a dandelion. If the ball goes by that dandelion, I will swing. But that's generally how we did. So went to college, and while I was in college, I got tapped to go to what they call the Washington Semester Program, which was at American University.
So where did you go to college?
Hartwick College in Oneonta, New York. People always call it Oneonta because it looks like Oneonta, but an Indian name. But spent a semester right after Kennedy was shot in Washington, D.C.
Oh, wow.
It was a fascinating time. But this Washington semester you studied the 3 branches of government, the press, and political parties. So it was a very fascinating time, and I always say that my girlfriends and I were part of the people who drove Jackie Kennedy out of Georgetown because they would put in the paper where she ate dinner or, where her house was. And interestingly, in those days, the Washington Post had a little box that told what the president's schedule was every day on the front page. Wow, not today.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So anyway, after graduate school, I worked a little bit, saved my money, and took a cheap tour to Europe and met 2 girls, teachers from Asheville. We were all the same age. We hit it off. They had rented a 3-bedroom apartment, and they needed a 3rd roommate. So I didn't have a job, but I had a place to stay. So I just moved to Asheville with them. My dad had played baseball professionally, and that's how he financed his seminary education as a Presbyterian minister. And so he remembered the S&W cafeteria, being a boy, always hungry, and also the beauty of the mountains. So that's when I got reacquainted with Dick Voorhees, who was finishing law school. He and his parents and my parents had known each other in upstate New York, and in also New Jersey when we lived there. We played together as kids, but we hadn't seen each other for 15 years. Anyway, we hit it off, and we ended up getting married, and then we had to find a place to get a job. And it boiled down to Greensboro and Gastonia. He had a lot of nice opportunities, but he felt that if he didn't practice law, then he would never really know what the practice of law was if he took a job in a trust department or something. So it boiled down to Gastonia and Greensboro, and I did not want to come to Gastonia. I saw that main street. I mean, here I'm a small town kid, but the railroad was right through town. I was not used to country clubs. I was not used to alcohol in the home. I was not used to maids. It was hard. It was hard. And I just didn't know where I fit. And I mowed the grass because we had to mow the grass as kids, and Dick had to work 5.5 days a week. So if he had to come home Saturdays and mow, we wouldn't have enough time. So I was just worried that it was going to damage his career if I was seen mowing the grass. In 1970, whatever. So, but it all worked out. But I started singing in the church choir, and then that led to an invitation to join a music club.
Was that First Presbyterian at that
Presbyterian,
time?
yeah. And I'll tell you, I didn't particularly care for First Presbyterian because the architecture was so modern. I was used to like colonial First Methodist, but anyway, I got over that too. I got over a lot of things. But that led to Gaston Music Education Foundation, and then it led to an invitation to join the Junior League. And I've got to put a plug in because that really focused me and began giving me a sense of belonging in Gaston County. Because the whole purpose of the league was to train volunteers to become effective volunteers in the community. And so the experiences that I had there, I had never heard of a 501c3 before the Junior League, but working on committees and then feeding into the board of directors and just that experience. And having experiences in different phases of the league really, really launched me. So I just decided I wanted to make the community better.
So, okay, I covered a lot there. So this is, how long after getting married did you kind of start getting involved in some of that, let's say the Junior League or some of that early?
2 or 3 years because the kids were little. I mean, they were little, and I didn't have a maid, which ended up being babysitters, I think, half the time.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't really until Martha started 3-year-old preschool at First Methodist that I got to know people my age who were more like me, maybe.
Yeah, and
But everybody was. I need to add that everybody was very gracious and very cordial and very nice. It was just me.
So it's interesting you say you said preschool at First Methodist. I was actually at preschool at First Presbyterian.
Were you really?
Yeah. I remember meeting my best buddy was Todd Thomas.
Who?
Todd Thomas
of Shrimp Boat.
Yes.
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 Okay.
So, that was probably my first real friend that I hung out with a lot. But another quick connection before we jump in here is we talked about it beforehand, and it's become legendary, famous now. Is the carpool to Sherwood Elementary that included the Longs, the Voorhees, the Schultz, and the McSwains.
Correct.
That correct? And I knew it. There's that picture I was talking about beforehand.
It's kind of blurry.
Beforehand, Naomi. There's this great picture back in the day. But, man, looking back, what a great carpool. So that was my, so that is where I originally got to know Barbara as somebody on the list who could discipline me at any moment as needed.
Really? You were afraid of me, were you?
I don't say afraid, but we had, Jan and I, hey, we have the list, like, not now because my kids are older, but like Kurt would be on that list, right? Of seeing my kids out of hand, out of order. You have the authority to. Can you pick out Joel and I on that picture?
I'm guessing this is Joel.
Yeah. Think NC State.
Yeah.
There he is.
What? You have blonde hair?
Yeah.
What do you mean I have blonde hair? Jeez.
I love that everybody's doing a piece.
How about those socks though?
Yeah.
I love it.
I mean, can you show it up to the? Well, I don't know if you can. That's not exactly. Maybe we can share that. Maybe we can. I've got actually. I think Janet has a better copy of that. We can probably
Yeah,
share it in the show notes. Maybe.
Well, I can.
That's embarrassing. I can't believe I just said that.
Did I remember doing the motorcycle? Didn't I do the motorcycle in the carpool? My husband rides motorcycles, and so I do you go.
Oh yeah.
But,
Yeah, back in the day, we're talking about back in the day when we would sit in the back of the what I call now the Griswold mobile, some of us facing backwards, facing toward the rear. Things you just couldn't do now. But man, it was so great. Listen, and I'm still friends with many of those people and know them and know their families. So it's just. Back in, that was just a great experience growing up in our neighborhood and all that. So I want to just point that out, that connection as well.
I was going to bring it up at some point.
So,
but 2 mechanical engineers out of there, 2 police officers, a nonprofit person, a granite and tile guy,
a famous
guitar maker.
Yes.
Personal on the West Coast.
I mean, so yeah, just a great experience, and boy, we had it going on with that fashion too, didn't we? Whew.
But that would have been what? When would Joel have been in 6th grade?
That would have been 76-ish. What age are you? 11 or 12 in 6th grade, or is that?
Well, Gavin's 12 in 7th grade.
So yeah, it would have been 76 or 77.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cute kids.
So yeah.
Nice boys. Good parents.
Back when NC State had a good basketball team.
Well.
In between national championships. So, yeah, Naomi, you got to watch this. Next thing you know, it'll be 4:00, and
yeah, I know.
Barbara and I'll still be talking.
That.
So, you kind of touched on that beginning time of the community involvement, and I'm not going to let you get by without making sure we touch on some of this. But then, where did that lead? Okay, so something is. Was there somebody, I like asking, this is a question I don't think I've ever asked, was there some event or some individual, or did you just feel like there's more, something else you wanted to do more for the community, then what all did you get involved with?
I just always have felt like I'm a drifter.
Okay.
I just drifted but I had opportunities, but any opportunity I had, if I accepted it, I tried to be responsible. I tried to do my homework, make a contribution, try to make the organization better. So then I'd get asked to do something else.
Yeah.
So at this point, I would say it would Benny Jo Howe and Ruth Day Dixon, if you knew them.
Okay.
Well, Benny Jo was neighborhood. Wonderful, wonderful ladies. Ruth Day's husband ended up serving in the legislature.
Okay.
But they were my early friends and mentors. But then I kind of got out of the music realm and was asked I had been involved in Republican door-to-door politics back when you could stick Republicans in a phone booth, is what they said. And so I ended up being a precinct judge at Sherwood, and that was fun with Connie Gibbons. And, if there was a new voter, we'd make a crown, or when you're bored in the summer with a primary runoff, when 12 people voted, we'd give an award for the best legs hanging down the curtain, the guy with... stuff like that. You have to do what you have to do. But at any rate, ended up being on the Board of Elections, which only had 3 people at the time. And that was interesting because on Election Day, we had to check polling places, and there, I forget, 50 polling places, and the 3 of us would split up where we went. And so that got me out into the county and seeing stuff, which later helped me at United Way, having been out in the county. And then Gaston Community Action, I said yes to that board because I couldn't get anybody to say yes to it. And I learned a lot there because a third of that board is elected officials. A third of it is community people like me, and a third of it was consumers, the people who were served. So I learned a lot about a different part of life in Gaston County,
Right.
and that was helpful. And then I got on the DSS board, and I was shocked, Department of Social Services, because there were only 5 members on that board, and you would think that huge budget, what if 5 people do? But one of the decisions we made was to locate the new department building on across from the courthouse on Long Avenue and Martin Luther King Boulevard. So good, bad, or indifferent. I don't think the people like hiking up that horrible hill, but the county and city had swapped the land. So it kind of kept me in the social services area. And I was just thinking back that in 9th grade I took a test. You did a preference test.
Yeah.
And it was social worker.
Huh.
And it was interesting because I never became a social worker, but I've been involved in social services. So
Sure.
anyway, that takes us up maybe to the early 80s.
Okay.
So
So what took you from there? I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to take the opportunity here to read off some of this stuff. This is a proclamation from 2017 from the city of Gastonia, but I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to talk about some of the things she's involved with. Executive director, most recently, probably of the Carrie E. and Lena V. Glenn Foundation, executive director of United Way of Gaston County, mayor's task force on homelessness, director and treasurer of the Shield Museum of Natural History, chair of the Gaston College Board of Trustees, president of the Rotary Club of Gastonia, founding member of the Gastonia Police Foundation, which included some things that she helped fund and start was the Police Memorial Park, Gang of One Gaston program, Great Gastonia Kids Camp, Police Family Day, Shop with the Cop, the Police Awards Banquet, in the Unity and the Community Program, CSI Camp, the Police Tourniquet Program, recipient of the 2000 Gaston County Woman of the Year, 2004 Athena Award, 2009 William Gaston Award, 2015 Caroline H. Garrison Award, which I know is something that's near and dear to you there. Member, deacon, elder, and clerk of session in numerous committees at First Presbyterian Church for Gastonia. And I also know this doesn't even include the things that we've touched on
well,
so
right.
far.
Yeah.
I mean, so
I don't know where they got that information.
yeah. So where do you feel? What led you to more recently going back? I think it was early '90s with the United Way. What kind of took you from social? Well, it's all social service related, really, community, the things that you were involved with. But what took you from that mid '80s to 7 or 8, 9 years later to the executive director of United Way?
Well, through my volunteer work, you get to know people.
Yep.
And I was non-paid, and I can say, money really wasn't important to me because my family said, taught me, or you learn that it's what you do, it's not what you have necessarily. So Caroline Garrison became my mentor.
Yeah.
And we had known each other through church and music. We weren't in the same music clubs, but we know each other. And so in the early 80s, they had started the United Arts and Science Council, brand new organization, and I was hired as the part-time executive director. Caroline was on the search committee. But so I learned a lot about the county. I learned about arts organizations. Well, then Caroline was the communications director at the United Way for many years and became the executive director in 1984. But so she needed to find a communications director. So she was my job finder. And so I started working, at the United Way. And, and that's really the first time I had a job a paying job, a responsible paying job besides responsible volunteer jobs. And so happily worked there for 6 years, and we actually garnered a national award in communications during United Way's centennial year with Laura Lineberger, Caroline's daughter, as
Right.
my volunteer chairman, and I was the gopher. But we did a stamp cancellation and a biathlon. We did a lot of things to promote the United Way during that period. So then Caroline was retired, And then I became the fund developer for the Alliance for Children and Youth, which at the time was a pretty brand new agency with Brownie Smyer, and learned how to write grants, which is like term papers. And then became the executive director of the United Way. And while I was the executive director of the United Way, Caroline had become the administrator of the Glenn Foundation. So when Caroline retired, she was tapped for the Glenn Foundation, and then when she retired from the Glenn Foundation, we were at an event for welcoming a new director to the mental health. Anyway, she said, I'm going to step down, and the board doesn't want to make this a public thing, but do you know anybody who would be interested in the Glenn? And my hand went just like that. So that's how that started. But had a very good run at the United Way, Stephen, because the textile manufacturing arm of our community was still strong.
Yeah.
With local ownership in many cases, people who really wanted United Way services available for their employees. And so we raised over $3 million each year for 6 years, over 19 million for the 6 years. I don't take any credit for it. We had wonderful campaign directors and wonderful volunteers. And then the great thing that happened during that time, too, was that when Caroline was a director, we ended up buying the United Way complex.
Yep.
And we were able to pay off the first mortgage and the construction mortgage for that during my tenure because we had good campaigns. And the other good thing that I recall happening at that time, too, was that needs assessment had shown that illiteracy was a huge problem in Gaston County. And because we had successful campaigns, we were really able to boost the staff of the Literacy Council, and they went from a little cubbyhole at the United Way complex to the Wesley Center.
Yeah, the First Methodist.
And First Methodist was generous to
just across the parking lot, kind of, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So anyway, that was a good run, and the people are always the great things about it.
Yeah, so I was fortunate to join Rotary early enough and long enough ago to get to know Caroline Garrison, and she was just so gracious.
Yes, she was.
Especially to new members at the time, because I'm 30 years old and trying to find my way, and she would always. She was intentional about making sure that I kind of knew what was going on and was comfortable, and because she could tell I was probably like, "What am I doing here?"
Yeah, because that was historically, the old man's club.
Yes.
Because women were not allowed in Rotary until
88 or 89. Yeah. Because I remember when I do orientation now, I talk about, women weren't in Rotary until I was a freshman in college, which is just weird. That's weird to say, isn't it?
It took a lawsuit for women to become members.
Yeah, I mean, that's
whatever.
But, Rotary got wise eventually, right? So tell me, if you can, share with our listener a little bit about the Glenn Foundation and just kind of some of the work there, because you were there from
17 years.
Yeah, from 2000 to 2017. Because I know when I joined Rotary, you had just transitioned to the Glenn Foundation, and then you're talking about Caroline Garrison was you may bring this up, but I'm going to say it anyway. Was kind of your job founder. Well, who you mentioned Laura Lomberger a couple times, right? And then and Laura followed you at the Glenn Foundation. Just kind of maybe share a little bit about your time there.
Okay. Well, I had first heard about the Glenn Foundation. It's Carrie E. and Lena V., two sisters. Yeah. Heard about it in about 1988, and that's when big money came into the foundation. And when I inquired who were Carrie and Lena, because the foundation was founded with $3 million. Carrie, a school teacher, Lena, a librarian, and how in the world, and that would be like $8 million today. So how in the world did they save enough money to do that? So that curiosity, that was one thing that made me excited about joining the Glenn Foundation. But the other thing that made me excited was that they had all the records intact, all the minutes, all the grant applications, whether they were funded or not, all the financial records, everything was pristine. So for a history major like I was, that was fun. So, but anyway, when I got there, I just had this curiosity about this family. And then I found out that they were 2 of 10 children. All 10 went to college. When you have a background like, and they were a farm family, the house is still there down on South New Hope, South 321 South, sorry. It's an amazing story. And I kept thinking someday somebody would write about this family. So every time somebody would call me, like Roy Short, who lived next door to the sisters when they were adults, who would say, you know, they would come over and use our telephone because they wouldn't pay for a telephone. Or Frank Matthews, who lived across the street, who'd say how his family would laugh when the sisters would walk across the street to watch television, a special television program, because they didn't buy a television. I would just make little notes and jot it down. But the Glenn Foundation was a wonderful opportunity because it kind of combined my Arts Council agencies with human service agencies. And so you really get to know the community when you work at it because of who applies. So we did some wonderful things. Well, I'm just thinking, it wasn't wonderful at the time, but we helped fund the Whitewater Center. Gave a loan that became a gift for a small foundation like the Glenn Foundation. That was a challenge, but the board felt that in the long run, the economic boost
impact
it would give,
over long term, yeah,
long term would be worth it. But Martha Rivers Park, we funded concerts, we funded school initiatives. For the 40th anniversary of the Glenn Foundation, we honored all of the recipients, over I think 160 recipients of services at that time, with a party. And because Carrie was a teacher and Lena was a librarian, gave a gift of $5,000 to each of the middle school libraries.
Yeah.
So, and those those librarians were, you have to have, the state, I guess, says you have to have books, certain number of books per student, and they have to be a certain age. You can't have 20-year-old books in your library. So that was beneficial. But the Glenn is, there are different kinds of foundations. You have corporate foundations that are funded through profits of the corporation. A big one that came up during my tenure were health conversion foundations, where hospitals were being sold, and you'd have all this money, and they would create a hospital-oriented foundation, like Sisters of Mercy in Charlotte. You had community foundations, which helped nonprofits with their endowments, because they could pool their money and also help individuals with their charitable giving. And then you have the Glenn Foundation, which is a private, independent. It's private in that all the money that ever went in there, basically, is from the 2 sisters.
Right.
And then independent board of directors from the community. So it was fun.
A little more freedom maybe to be able to, when it's private like that, there's not as many restrictions. I don't know. I'm just asking, is that a fair, or did the sisters lay out?
No, there wasn't a lot. Their only request was that any money they might leave go where it was needed most.
Wow, yeah.
To do the most good. And that, but really, they made their own clothes. They grew their own food. They had, do you know where the Oakley apartments just down from the First ARP Church on South Chester Street?
Yeah.
It's all residential, and then you have these 2 huge apartment buildings. That's where they lived.
Okay.
And it makes me sick that of all the houses on that street, the only one that has ever been destroyed is that house, their house.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so they had a large yard and a lot of fruit and nut trees, and Carrie was a pie baker. She baked pies all the time. And
well, it's like the millionaire next door, right, story, where you just don't know. And then the reason I wanted to ask about that, because with my involvement with you, Rotary, the Community Foundation, I'm familiar with the Glenn Foundation, and I know a lot of what has transpired with that organization over the years. But I think it's one of those really well-kept secrets of Gaston County.
People say that, yeah.
But it's such a great story, and 2 individuals that just left a positive legacy for Gaston County.
and had no idea what
Yes.
impact.
Yeah, I mean, if they could see it now and everything that has occurred, I bet they would just be blown away.
And the board often says that.
Yeah.
And the board has always been mindful of where needed most to do the most good. That's been the hallmark of that foundation, and a great loyalty to honor those sacrifices.
Is there anything you look back on, gosh, your time in being involved? I'll just leave it just there because there's some things we hadn't even touched on as well. But is there something or a couple of things that you can think of that maybe you're most proud of accomplishing or seeing happen, or most proud of something you were involved with? Does anything come to mind there? Or is that too hard of a question?
Well, there are a few things.
Besides the carpool that Cheryl went.
That's the highlight of my life, my entire life. I love you. Being a guardian for Flight of Honor, Rotary Flight of Honor. Oh,
wow, yeah.
That was a great honor.
Oh, wow, me too. That's a great one.
Another one comes to mind, that being the Presbyterian that I am, that I was asked to chair a fundraiser for the Presbyterian Home for Children, which is now called Black Mountain Home for Children.
Okay.
And some Gaston County children have lived up in this orphanage. And the need became apparent that when these kids were turning 18 and graduating from high school, they had no families to go to, and they lost the DSS subsidy. And so they determined that they needed to build apartments for these kids if they went to school or had a job, and that would give them a transitional housing until they could get on their feet. So it was a very emotional, very needed cause. And when the staff asked these 18-year-olds what they wanted in their new apartment, they all wanted to be able to lock their doors because they'd all lived in a kind of a communal setting, and they all wanted their own bathroom. So anyway, walked into a room of 14 Presbyterian churches, representatives, because we were going to raise money from Gaston County for this cause. And I can remember saying a little prayer because I didn't know any. I knew 2 people in there. There were probably 30 people there. But they all got on the mission. We ended up with a talent show, clergy talent show, a barbecue sales, a silent auction, raised close to, and then they did some grants, and close to $45,000 for that. And that was just a gem. But I have to tell you, did you ever know Patrick Perryman? He was an associate at First Presbyterian. We rented him a white one-piece Elvis costume and fake fur, and he does a real good impression of Elvis.
Oh, that's good.
The other one was Southminster Presbyterian Church, 6'4". His church members dolled him up in a tutu, and he gave him a ukulele, and he did tiptoe through the tulips. It was hysterical. Oh. But anyway, and then John Stanley dressed in drag because some of his congregation was involved in the little theater, and he sang Secondhand Rose. But anyway, we had a good time. It made a lot of money, and that was sort of Gaston County related.
Sure.
I've been on some state things, and I just have never been interested the way I am. You feel like you can make a difference more, and that's the neat thing about Gaston County. I mean, it's been large enough where it has a variety of opportunities, but it's small enough where you feel like you can make a difference.
Yeah. So if somebody's listening out there, they're feeling that, because I kind of felt that tug or something. I felt like, in that late 20s, early 30s, I don't know if I can't point something specifically looking back, but I wanted to just do more, Of course, listen, Mom and Dad both were involved, and so I witnessed that, and they talked about it, but they weren't big on, Stephen, you have to go do this. You have to go do that. They always let Joel and I kind of find our own way, but being so blessed, I just felt like I want to do something. And kind of church and then Rotary was kind of the first 2 big things that I got involved with. Mm-hmm. If somebody's listening, what would you say you've kind of touched on it, but what would you say to some young person who is on that fence or feeling that tug? What advice or encouragement would you give them to how to go find that thing, or how to go, how to get started?
I just think you take advantage of the opportunities that are here and do as much as you can, work as hard as you can, and network with people. I never asked to do a job. I just got asked.
Yeah.
So I think what you do speaks for yourself, speaks for you more than you're doing. But I mean, it's a hard question, but I think church is the greatest networker.
Probably, yeah.
Well, it's changing. The world is changing.
Sure.
But
my direct getting into Rotary was through church. Steve Weitzel.
okay.
I go to church together. We were serving on building grounds committee.
Excellent.
And I heard him talking about Rotary. We were doing a little project, doing some painting in the basement at First Methodist Church. And I started asking him some questions about Rotary. I knew, and then Joel was already in the other club because I sure wasn't going to go to that one. So
well, that's not as good as the old man.
So Steve asked me, "You want to come to a meeting?" I said, "Okay." This was 2000, maybe.
Wonderful.
And so that's kind of, so to your point, that was a direct. And of course, with churches like First Methodist, we were there primarily we moved from Covenant Baptist, is where Janet was when we got married, and then
is that across from the Fuse? Is that Covenant?
Covenant Baptist is across from Gardner Park School.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Covenant Methodist is across from
Methodist. Okay.
across from Fuse. But when we were going to have our first child, we wanted to find a strong youth program, and that's what led us to First Method, which is great. And we're a few months from being out of the youth program at First Methodist with getting ready to have our last graduate high school. But so man, time goes by quick, doesn't it? So I felt that kind of tug and looking for something. And to your point, church is a good example of where that can lead if you're paying attention, and you're listening. So many things are about timing and serendipitous timing, and all kinds of strange things can happen.
Just networking, getting to know people, and just painting a room.
Yeah,
with Steve Weitzel,
absolutely.
My buddy from the Rotary restrooms.
All right, so we're going to, there's a couple things I want to finish with, and then we're going to make sure to give you the last word, of course. But we do shift gears occasionally. But before we do that, is there anything I haven't asked, or anything that you wanted to make sure, a point you wanted to make sure you got across? It seems like every episode I always think of a question I didn't ask. And that's just the way it is,
Right.
Especially when you're not a professional. But
after 117, you're becoming a professional.
Well, I work with a professional over here.
Well, one thing I just was thinking about when we were talking to Rotary is the Rotary Pavilion.
Sure.
And I was on that committee. Melinda Lowry was the chairman. It got to the point, there were a lot of naysayers about it because they said it was going to be dropped in the middle of an asphalt parking lot. Downtown was dead. Why did you want to build something new? And that was the whole idea, was to get something new downtown to be a focal point, and maybe downtown would change. And that was 2005, and it only takes close to 20 years, but downtown is definitely changing.
Oh, sure it has.
But I was charged of bricks, and my children started saying bricks was a 4-letter word because that's all I talked about.
Well, you know what? I have our family has a brick, and the company has a brick down there. Yeah. Because I was already a member of the club when that was, but I was still, trying to find my way in the club, so I wasn't involved a whole lot on big stuff like that.
But you're a working guy too, and that's
fair enough.
Yeah,
fair enough.
And Glenn Foundation was a part-time job, so you work part-time, you get paid part-time, but you think about it full-time. But so I had more freedom to do stuff. But Tory Bourne helped proof the brick inscriptions, and there was no error. So
that's good.
But anyway, so that's been a landmark, and then the city came along and put grass and put brick sculpture, and little by little.
I mean, listen, there's something happening down there pretty much every week.
That's right, and it's new. And if you leave the Fuse and drive on Main Street, it is so much fun at night.
Yeah, no question.
Lights and activity.
Well, we like to shift gears here. I've got this
serious questions.
These serious Gaston County questions. I'm going to call this, I make up a name every week. This is going to be the Sherwood Carpool speed round of questions.
Okay.
Okay.
And I need to tell you, my husband has always called me a contrarian. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Okay.
Okay.
We don't care about that.
Okay.
So, first question. Favorite Tony's ice cream flavor?
Absolutely chocolate milkshake.
I'm with you.
I
knew it.
Yes, sir.
Sundrop or Cheerwine?
Pepsi, but it was in North Carolina. Founded in
You
North
sound
Carolina.
like my son, Alex. That's exactly what he would say. You know,
I
and
just-
he
I
got
don't-
that. He got that from my dad. My dad was a Pepsi guy.
Well, I don't like cherry flavors, and you always hear about all the caffeine in Sundrop, so I just never.
Yeah, I don't think either one of them very much any often. Favorite outdoor activity in Gaston County or
Well,
favorite park?
it was mowing grass for a long. Then Dick retired and took it over, took me off, but I like Martha Rivers.
Yeah,
you know,
that's
and
great,
The
yeah.
Glenn Foundation had a hand in that playground, but I also like
Yeah, our
Rankin
kids
Lake.
have. We've got some. Our kids have some
Yeah.
handprints out there.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
But
Oh,
you know,
yeah,
I've
that's-
had some knee replacements, and so I'm not as active outdoors as I have been in the past.
but your point about cutting grass. I still cut my grass. It's great.
Dick changes the oil in his car still.
Oh well,
Do
no,
that?
I have
No?
to admit I don't do that. But yeah, growing up, it was cutting grass and washing cars like on the weekend before I could go do anything.
Yeah.
Man,
But-
we've spoiled our kids.
Man, and
Jeez.
with me, it was raking leaves. You couldn't go to the football game until
Mhm.
high school football until you raked the leaves.
That's so funny. All right, this is
Okay.
super important, and I'm not going to add in an extra one like I think you might want me to. But UNC Duke or NC State?
See, this is a problem because Dick went to UNC Law School. His brother went to Duke, but since you went to NC State, hands down, NC State.
Oh, I knew it. I'm glad you didn't try to throw Appalachian in there
No,
for somebody we know.
no, somebody, yeah.
So, what is something very few people know about you?
Well,
Everybody
I
knows
ca-
you're
I
a
ca-
Yankee now, so we
Yeah.
can't keep that.
I can throw a baseball like a boy. There were 3 girls. I mean,
I don't
think
doubt
about
that.
it. Think about all those years ago when girls just threw like that, But we know how. Donated over 10 gallons to of blood to American Red Cross.
Holy moly!
Once upon a time, played the piano, cello, and clarinet.
Good gracious, I didn't
Yeah.
know that one.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was funny because the cello I took up as a sophomore in high school. We had public school lessons. It was the Rockefeller era in New York State, so there was a lot of money for schools. But you didn't have to take, as a senior, didn't have to take lessons. So like a year and a half, I wasn't very good, but I played in a little string quartet with Benny Joe and Ruth Day. And I always played my best in noisy receptions where nobody could hear you.
That's funny.
So anyway, that'll do.
How about a book or something you would recommend, a blog you follow, articles you've read, just something that you might share with our listeners?
Read an article this morning from the Wall Street Journal about the difference between a democracy and a republic, which was very eye-opening because the word democracy is used so much.
Yeah.
But the republic
The literal definition is
the
not what
republic
we're-
elects the representatives who do the laws.
Yeah.
But I've been reading A Year in Provence. It's a book my mother had, and it's very entertaining. Peter Mayle, I think is how you pronounce it. It's just an English couple that moves to France because
Okay.
they love it, and they get involved in all these quirky people. But the one that I think I would recommend would be The Greatest Generation by Tom Brokaw, about World War II people.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And it's just a series of essays about people who've come back from the war and wanted to make our community better. And it made me think about people like Chick Garland and
Oh yeah.
Franz Holscher and Bill Lawson and T. Pearson and
People that I've got to know through Rotary.
through Rotary.
Yeah.
Me too.
I was so
Me too.
intimidated. I think when I first walked in
Yes.
that one day, I was like, "What?
I
what
agree.
am I doing? I don't belong. I don't belong here with these." With
Yeah,
these
but they become your
individuals."
mentors too.
Yes,
so
no
yeah.
question.
Yeah. So that's a good book.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. So, listen, I appreciate your indulgence kind of on those Gaston County questions. That's really what, Kurt especially wants to know if he didn't know already.
Yeah. Well, he thought I was a Coke drinker, but I've switched to Pepsi for some reason. I don't know how that happened.
Well, I won't, again, kind of like Syracuse in that area. I won't hold that against you
Okay.
permanently.
Okay. Appreciate that.
So, remember this is a podcast about Gaston County, things that we enjoy and admire about Gaston County. And you've already shared a lot of reasons. I answered this question already, but I'm going to ask you anyway. So, other than your things you've been involved, organizations directly you've been involved with, why would you say Gaston County is such a great place?
Historically, we are so blessed by our geography. what other county in the state has a state park that's the most heavily visited in North Carolina?
And we take that for granted, probably.
We take it for granted, and have two rivers that, as time goes on, become more and more valuable for recreation and fun. And so, but I have always thought it's the people. I used to get so mad when the growth went to Fort Mill, and then it went to Union County and went up to Lake Norman, and why can't we do? And then it would snow in Lincoln County. It wouldn't snow in Gaston County. It ticked me off. But it just, it's just a special place. And I think people who move here, it's not as much as it was 30 years ago when radio stations in Charlotte would mock Gaston County. And in the 70s, I think we were the heaviest murder. We had a murder rate during the Sherwood carpool.
Yeah.
And what
do you mean? Just look at the clothes. I mean.
but the answer to that one was, if you didn't, it was mostly killing relatives. So if you stayed away from your relatives, you'd be okay. Yeah, but anyway, but it's the people, and the people who care, and they donate money, and they donate their time. And I think about that 30 age group, and you're right. And so I think it's up to some of the older people to encourage.
Yeah. Well, listen, that's what happened to me, and that's what I'll probably end with. But before I do that, knowing what you know now, Barbara, what advice? There might be a 20-year-old listening. What advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Well, take advantage of opportunities as they present themselves. Don't say no. Make your parents proud. Stay on the high road. Don't get devolving into bad stuff. You're on earth for a purpose, and make that purpose count. Make your life count for something. So in any way you can. And we need tradesmen, we need lawyers, we need doctors, we need mechanics, and
absolutely
find your niche and go for it.
Yeah, I think there's this image that you have to do something just unbelievably great to make this impact. Gosh, but it's not. I think it's right here, there in front of us.
Well, and when you're a homeowner and you need a plumber, or you need the leaves out of your gutter, or really, I mean, really, it's we all work together.
Yeah, that's that's a great point, and I appreciate that greatly. So, there are a couple things I want to finish with, but any last words before we close this episode out? This has been really, really good, and
I did not back in to my parking spot.
Again,
we've already covered the Sherwood carpool.
We'll mark that off as.
And I do have a poem I would like to recite at the end. At
the
very end.
All right. Very good. So before we do that, I am going to. So you mentioned about 30-year-olds or whatever the age group is, and people who we're interacting with those individuals all the time. I mean, our age range here at GSM, as an example, is I think right now probably 18 to 70. So I have an opportunity every day with 280 individuals.
Wow.
But a couple things that how you personally have impacted me. First was with the carpool, and frankly, just getting us safe to school every day.
It's a miracle.
So, yeah, it probably is. I can't imagine the 9 of us in a car and a reasonable adult trying to drive somewhere with that many knuckleheads in the.
But the good thing was it was only about a mile.
Yeah, it wasn't far.
You should have all walked, actually.
Yeah, that's probably a good point. Yeah, you're right. It wasn't very far to Sherwood for any of us, actually.
But it was a big hill. Yeah. Nottingham is a big hill.
Yeah, we were whiners, probably. But when I joined Rotary, I tried to find my way. I think I had joined the board already. But one day I get a phone call from you, and you asked me if I would consider getting in line to be president of the Rotary Club. And I thought, have you lost your mind? But what that did for me is, if Barbara Voorhees thinks I could possibly be capable of being president of the Rotary Club, maybe I'm not. Maybe if she thinks that, then there has to be some validity to it. So, I mean, so my point when you talk about we encouraging others and asking, frankly, you mentioned that earlier, right? How many times you were asked to do something.
Mm-hmm.
Well, sometimes I'm like, oh God, I hope Barbara doesn't answer because I won't be able to say no.
Right.
But that is what's required. I mean, it does take individuals like yourself showing confidence in others that may not believe. I mean, I literally walked in the road those first couple of years. I was like, why am I even here? I mean, I
That's
can't.
Interesting.
And so that's a good example. So I think you are doing that, and it's as much by your example as just when you literally go do something like ask somebody like myself.
But I remember something before that. For about 4 years, you were sergeant at arms.
Yeah.
And you were there early and late for every meeting, setting up the meeting and taking attendance.
Back at the old city club.
At the old city club. And as president, I had the honor of presenting a Paul Harris Fellow to somebody. And I decided He was an
I remember
unsung,
that clearly, yes.
And we sneaked your parents and Joel in. And Joel wrote a wonderful letter about how you were developing the residential side of GSM.
Yeah. Wow.
That's what I remember most.
Yeah. So this is an example of why I wanted to have you on, and just, I'm just grateful for the few years of relationship. And the second part of that is, you've got two terrific kids, and one of them, great friends up through college, and then like so many things, you kind of get disconnected, right? You graduate, you go on, you live in your own life. He's also spent 30 years as a public servant. So that's
proud of that.
Yes.
Even though I was panicky, and I loved my daughter-in-law because she married a police officer.
Yes.
I don't know that I could ever married a police officer.
But gosh, now 9 or 10 years ago now, Kurt and I reconnected, and he is, I consider him as good a friend as I've ever had. And we, he's somebody I share anything with, and just, and then related to that is another thing that you were involved with. One of the greatest honors of my life was when you asked me to introduce and present the Paul Harris Fellow to him.
Yes, and that was a no-brainer.
Well, again, but I was like, what? But again, it was. But just,
I mean, who would want his mother to present a?
Well, he probably would, frankly. But anyway, I'm just saying that's 3 or 4 examples of the impact, direct impact. Not forget the indirect impacts of But my point there is too, when we're talking about all these things about Gaston County, about getting involved, we think it's typically not as big of things that we're doing just day to day do make an impact, and they can make an impact. And sometimes I've had people say to me just recently about a kid that I coached back at First Methodist, 10 years ago, something going on. I mean,
just never know.
Yeah, you never know. So before I get you to, because I will give you the very last word, but before I do that, I do a book recommendation and a thought for the week each episode, and then I'll let you finish with your poem.
Okay.
And I'm intentional. I try to be intentional based on the guest when I pick these the books, and it just happens to be luckily a book I just finished. I'm a big John Maxwell fan. I haven't read all of his books, but I just finished reading one of his called Leadership Gold, and it's just frankly, it's just how to be a better leader. And sometimes we associate leadership with some grand thing like Kurt leading the Charlotte Police Department or whatever.
Right.
But to me, it's more of the day-to-day stuff.
I agree
It's
with
the
you.
United Way and the Glenn Foundation and Rotary Club. I mean, that's really where the day-to-day impact comes and happens. And my thought, I was very intentional with this one too. Matter of fact, if anybody follows me on social media, I typically share 2 things a week. Mm-hmm. On Monday mornings, I share a thought for the week. And then typically I will share the links to this episode, the podcast on Thursday or Fridays. And the one I shared this past Monday, I was intentional because I knew you were coming on. And it was from Kenneth Langone, who is one of the founders of Home Depot. And he said the 2 most powerful things in existence, a kind word and a thoughtful gesture. So I was just scanning quotes thinking, okay, what comes across? I was looking for leadership and service, but ultimately that struck me as Barbara Voorhees, right there.
Well, I appreciate that.
You know, so that's why, again, I was intentional about picking that one this week. So with that said,
Thank you.
I will give you the last word, and I'm sure this is going to be a poem about how great NC State is.
This is a poem that was written by Jenny Stoltz and the Divas. And because I've had a cold, I cannot sing it. But you may hum along because you will recognize the melody.
I think our listeners may be grateful that.
Are you ready?
I am.
God blessed Gaston County, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From Crowder's Mountain to the fish camps, to the South Fork white with foam. God bless Gaston County, my home, sweet home.
Oh, wow. I wasn't sure what I was going to get there.
Well, not much.
But it was better.
I've come a long way.
It was much better than I expected. Something we didn't touch on much is also Barbara's terrific sense of humor. And I get to see it in Rotary on occasion. It's just
Sick.
wonderful. And she dialed that down a little bit today, maybe. But wow, that was terrific. So, Barbara, I can't thank you for your time enough for your time, and I can't thank you again for the example you set and all the work. Again, we touched on a lot of it, but not everything that you've accomplished and done for our community. Another thing I thought about sharing, I'll go ahead and share it, is the Rotary motto, service above self. That's another thing that I think of when I think of you and why I was really I'm grateful that we persevered and got her on. It took a while, didn't it? She had all these excuses about surgery or something.
Oh, geez.
So again, thanks so much, Barbara. I'm looking forward to getting this episode released, which we're recording this on Wednesday, the 31st, and we're going to release it tomorrow. So it's going to be quick, February 1st.
Okay.
So to our listeners out there, as always, we sure appreciate you taking the time listening to today's episode. Please continue to spread the word if you can about the podcast. And please don't hesitate to contact us here at our email address, which is podcast@gastonsgreat.com. We are always looking for suggestions for future podcast topics and guests. You can find the podcast and subscribe at the website, gastonsgreat.com, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Please follow us on all our social media platforms, and please give us a good 5-star rating. As Naomi says, it helps the podcast get noticed. Thanks again to Barbara Voorhees for being our guest today. Gaston's Great is produced and brought to you by Naomi Hunt and Amy Anderson from GSM Services. I'm your host, Stephen Long. Thanks again for hanging out with us, and keep coming back to hear more reasons why Gaston's great.